Good evening and welcome to the forum, the Members Surgery Live. I hope you enjoyed that little introduction. I certainly did. The stream that is now live on behalf of North East Region and the Leeds #1 Amalgamated Branch. My name is Scott Haslam, President of the Leeds Branch, and tonight, Shelley Banbury, CW Postal Executive, and Dave Hutchinson, Area Distribution Rep. And tonight we're going to talk about network and area distribution functions this afternoon, but specifically there's some side topics that we're going to go into. So hi guys, would you like to introduce yourself, Shell?
Afternoon everyone. That's an absolutely brilliant intro, Scott. So send me a copy of that because I think that's fantastic. Genuinely, I do. I'm Shelley Banbury. I'm a member of the CW Post Executive. I work for Davy Robertson. I look after predominantly the drivers in logistics and area distributions, and some other bits that Davy gives me. I actually work in the distribution function. I didn't want to do a big long intro because I said to Scott, if I did that, I'd cover all the subjects. So we'd focus on me. So just to say that I've been a CW rep since 1997, been with the business since 95. I'm married to a regional organiser for Parcel Force who covers London and the South East, David Banbury. And I have two beautiful daughters who are 21 and 20 and make me feel extremely old. And all of them fully support the role that I do. And I do love the role that I do. So that's me, short and tight there.
Dave, do you want to give a brief intro for anybody that might not know you from outside the branch?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Shelley. My name's Dave Hutchinson. I'm the Area Distribution Rep for the Leeds #1 branch. For the purposes of this live stream today, I cover network and area distribution, among a few other functions, as part of my remit of the Area Distribution Rep.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. So if you have questions, then leave them in the comments, whichever stream you are watching from. We'll endeavour to get to them wherever we can and put them on stream for the panel to answer as and when. Also, if you can let us know where you're watching from, that will also be quite useful and interesting. And equally, you know, if you know someone who might make some use of this session, give them a tag, give them a nudge, give them a wink, whatever you want to do, get them into our stream, and let's get this session into action. So to start off the session, it's called Network and Area Distribution, and currently there's activity going around the country, to be fair, in both functions. So in terms of the network revision, Shell, what is the network revision activity? How is that working, and how far along on that journey?
So Scott, the network revision activity is when we normally do them yearly. Obviously, as you both know, we're about 3 years since we've last done a network review. So the network review reviews the whole of the network in relation to national distribution. And that's different to if you're doing a delivery revision or if you're doing a pad revision, because you do that around your office. The network review ultimately ends up with an office revision, but we review all of the network duties. So what we do is we do a data gathering, which we did in February of this year, where we use our local experts, our CW reps on site, where they gather the data on what we currently have in the RSL as duties that we do on a daily, weekly basis. We then gather that data nationally for normally 1 day, but we try and cover it over a week. We then give that to the business and they run it through the lovely program called Paragon. Unfortunately, this year, as again, you would all know, with an LTB we had to put out due to the last year and the massive increase in work, the high levels of work we've picked up, we were delayed in getting the data into Paragon due to so many changes and us not really being up to date with that data. So we were unable to maintain our momentum, I suppose you could say, because we would probably have been somewhere near the end of the network review if we had. So it's a couple of weeks ago now that we saw the final cut of the data. which, you know, Scott, you sit on my working group, so you know that you have a lot of input into that. So we get a final cut of the data. If we're comfortable and we're happy that that data's okay for everyone. So just so everyone knows, I get a day and I get hours. I don't get to see what duties are coming your way. I don't get to see what work falls to ground. We just get to see if there is sufficient workload for the office. And then we release that data. And that's when locally all the CW reps with their planners work through the work they've been given. And create phenomenal duty sets, hopefully innovative duty sets across 3 or 4 days, incorporating weekends, because as we all know, weekends has become quite a priority for us over this last year. And we create that and we go live all on one day. So it's not a case of YDC is ready and YDC goes live and NDC. It's a case of once we've completed that activity, and again, the working group is comfortable, we give a go live date and the network changes on that one day. Does it cause me some headaches? I'm pretty much certain it does. Do we have some hills to climb? Absolutely. We're only 2 weeks into that activity, so people have only just really received that duty set. But I'm confident with the experienced reps we've got in the field and the training and support from the working group, everyone will be working along that pretty robustly.
Excellent. So I know you've touched there on that network particularly is, I suppose if there's anyone interested who's watching that isn't from a network background, I suppose the closest we can do a comparison from the other functions when we talk about delivery and the structural revisions is very much a drains up affair, divvying it out amongst not just specific like which officers they want to prioritize, like such as you said, the big units. It's very much more about, you know, a more complicated way of divvying it up, isn't it? So you've got your role license, the staffing list or staffing posts, quite a dynamic way. It's just a bit questionable sometimes how it works, but yeah. So in terms of the network, then Dave, to bring Dave in on this aspect. From an area perspective, how involved would you normally get with those sorts of reviews?
In terms of network, you know, and the YDC from our point of view, you know, we've got some very experienced reps in there, yourself included, and you know, it does help when you, as Shelley says, you actually use it on the joint working group where it's an opportunity. If we think that there's going to be some hiccups along the way, you can flag it up directly to Shelley to meet with the people that Shelley interfaces with and flag that up if there's a suggestion that it might not be running smoothly for our VOC or any VOC in that effect. But for me, at the moment, obviously we've got a pad revision as well. Every function's now putting revisions in following the pathway to change agreement. Area distribution for us, the Mid Yorkshire area, Leeds, Bradford, and York. It's a significant sized area. But from a network point of view, you know, we've got the outputs. Had them a week and a half, I think now, and I think you're all, you know, working through that to see where we are. I mean, the important thing to remember is we are doing it from a growth point of view this year because the bizarre year we've just had with the pandemic. Obviously, we are doing it from a growth point of view. Even you know, I'll touch on the agency stuff in a short while for all functions if I can. But yeah, we're additional drivers, a huge recruitment campaign, which I'm sure Shelley will touch on for LGV1. And it's a different year to normally where we're looking at potentially loss of work. And I would hope it's the opposite this year, Scott.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dave. So again, you know, for people that are watching, not directly employed in network or area distribution, perhaps are watching to see how to get onto network or area distribution. If you just get tuned, we have got a little section where we will cover about recruitment, as Dave has alluded to. So that's the network. It's very much a fixed, robust machine, and really we've got minimal type of input on that from a structural perspective. All our sort of efforts as a trade union comes in at the local level to mould the set into something that the membership would hopefully accept. So if we move that across to the very similar but a very unique and special type area, which is the area distribution, because it does work similar in some regards, but it's very, very different on many aspects, and it's quite important that we make that differential. So Shelley, would you have to cover area distribution, perhaps why it's so special, and maybe why it has to be different to how we operate in network?
So I think both driving commutes are special, but that's me in my own way. But area distribution is different to national distribution. As I've explained, national distribution is a national network. It's a group of offices that we align the network through. And that's why we call it a network review when we review it. I failed to remind everyone that Mini-Vox were included in that this year, which we've created through previous PAD revisions. Complicated it a little bit, but we're working through that. But area distribution, we follow a PAD agreement for area distribution, which looks after the units individually. Again, they have an RSL, the road service list, which they work through. They gather the data in the same way we would gather the data for the network. We would run it through an optimization tool, and we give it back. But it is specifically aligned to that unit. So if in your case it's Leeds unit that we will review. It's not something we put into Paragon and mix and move the work around. The work belongs to Leeds. So we work through that process. It's a little bit more complicated in some respects, because you are looking at some of the routes as to whether you can upscale them to 17 ton, or whether they remain on 7.5. We've reintroduced 21s, York 7.5 tons recently with the safe systems of work. So it's whether you can utilise that type of vehicle. But it also makes sure that it stays within the locality of that unit. And it's saying to people that actually there are two completely different RSLs. So we have an RSL for network and we have an RSL for area distribution, and neither connect, because what we can't have is the network saying, actually, we could run that work better on one of our routes, in the same way we can't have area distribution say that would be better on one of ours. We work that through for our BAU activity throughout the year. If we're not properly using vehicle utilisation, or if we think we can do something a little better. So there are two distinct and separate RSLs, like they are two distinct and separate business units. And we work through the PAD agreement in pretty much the same way we would do for network. We would create the duties from the optimisation. I suppose the different thing for area distribution this year, though, is definitely the weekends. Looking at more weekend working. I know we've done an awful lot over the last year with the test kits and doing that. But as you're all aware, Simon Thompson, the new CEO, is very keen on a 7-day service. So that absolutely will have an element of impact on area distribution to make sure that we get the traffic to the offices when they need it, so they're able to deliver. But that would be the ultimate difference. Base is the same. It's a tried and tested process. We've done it for years. And again, I leave it to my local teams that are there. We also have a working group. Scott's lucky enough not to sit on that one. There is another working group that looks specifically after PAD. So again, if there are issues, there is a group of people can tap into, and that we can check on, and just to make sure that the support is there. Those details all the area reps should have for both working groups. But if they don't have them, honestly, they're readily available. Just contact the department. But over the next week or two, the area reps will start getting phone calls from the two groups, just to check in, just to see if they need any support, just to get an update. I don't always leave it for the business to tell me everyone's red, amber or green. I quite like to get the information from the working group. So there's a list out there for network. They'll start this week, and hopefully area distribution will start catching up next week, because I think the last level of offices are due to receive their outputs at the end of this week. So that's where they're slightly different, but it is really to say they are two distinct and separate functions with distinct and separate RSLs, and both are extremely important.
Excellent, thanks for that, Shell. I've got to admit that, certainly picking up on the last point about the ring rounds, it's something you introduced when you took the lead on, because you were the first sort of executive member taking it on after Davey went up to the assistant secretary for the department, and certainly I think that were quite well. Certainly the network, it were broadly welcomed. So I think you've carried that on. That's been a good thing, and it looks like you've rolled that over onto the area distribution. So I'm sure everyone in the country will really appreciate that. So, Dave, in terms of the area distribution, there's, as Shelley sort of alluded to, with the RSL and having a sign-off. So how did that pan out at Leeds? Without putting you on the spot too much in terms of the process, I'm not about
funnily enough,
white as long as what it did, but
funnily enough, we've had
how was it identified?
Yeah, we've had some very interesting debates this week just gone about the RSLs, because for those who aren't aware, Leeds, we have obviously an area distribution function, and we also have a mini-VOC, which I think carries 19 duties, including reserves, 18 or 19. So on Shelley's point there about there being two distinct RSLs, understandably, I mean, I think if I remember, Shelley might tell me different. I think some time ago, I think the business were looking to have just one RSL, and then they could just move everybody about, and you'd come and you'd be sent everywhere. And I think as a trade union, we objected and secured the distinct RSLs for each function, which is why your 7.5 ton functions have one RSL, and the mini-VOC stroke network have other RSLs for their own units. So it's quite important. But interestingly enough, I've got to say this. When we put the mini-VOC in Leeds, I think I've got 2015 in my head when it came in. I don't think that mini-VOC, we got the drivers, we had people stepping up to 17-ton driving. We even got a training list together. People flowing through from MGV, trained by the business at the business cost up to 17-ton. But I don't think Network ever really got a hold of the mini-VOCs in terms of what they were running around with. As I said last week, we've had some interesting debates, in Leeds particularly, about which work sits with the MGV, which work sits with the mini-VOC. We've now sort of established that. I think it's fair to say that when we get to a point where we're actually putting 318s together, I'm hoping that both functions will see growth in terms of duties and people sitting on them vehicles. So, it's just about, I think there's certainly a contentious feeling that, in Leeds, and I'm guessing other sites that have a joint mini-VOC on site will be thinking the same thing, where there seems to be a lot of thing going from the 7.5 ton fleet onto the bigger fleet with customer growth and customer requirements. There doesn't seem to be a lot coming back the other way from the 17 tons down onto the MGV. So I think that once we get this revision established and running and deployed in Leeds, I think the business might be looking at the mini-VOCs to say what exactly sits correctly for them vehicles. In terms of utilising the fleet, I think that's the right thing to do, but it's obviously a conversation that needs to be had at Shelley's level and probably the joint working groups, etc. Scott.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Dave. There's a couple of comments come through on the stream. So, Dave Walker, we have answered this through this, as I asked about the RSL. Well, the RSL is a road service list. Shelley did say that at the opening. Having said that, I think it's a valid point. The RSL is effectively just a list of data that everybody runs to. That's in its simplest form. So there's another one here which is from a Mark Harrison from Leeds. Just wants to wonder if we can extinguish quite quickly any potential rumours of it disappearing. Well, I think you quite categorically said there, Dave. There may be some movement between the two functions, but it's there to stay. Okay, excellent. So I think
just on that. Sorry, just on that. Look, Dave's absolutely spot on. Network did not pick up the mini-VOCs, and to be fair, we also put a blocker in the way on the last network review back in 2018, where we chose not to include the mini-VOCs because some of them had only just been created. So the last thing we wanted to do was upset people when they'd literally just become a network driver, and within a month or two we could have gone for a massive revision. So this is the first time they've been included in the National Network Review, and absolutely supporting Dave. And in answering that question, Leeds Minivox still exists once we put that data out, so it's not going anywhere. But I also take on board that we need to look at that vehicle utilisation. So that's something that I think we'll work together on after.
Excellent.
Just, Scott, can I just pick up on Mark's point briefly?
Yes.
Well, I know Mark's a 17-ton driver down in Leeds, and no, Mark, just to sort of put a line under it, no, there's no plans to transfer the Minivoc to the YDC. The Minivoc will stay on site in Leeds. Certainly for this revision. What happens in future, it's in the lap of the gods, but no, there's no plans to move it out whatsoever.
Yeah, it's interesting using the term mini-VOC as well, isn't it? When you have a VOC and then a mini-VOC and then you have an area distribution site. And I suppose in the simplest terms, the easiest way of looking at it is area distribution up to 7.5 ton. Mini-VOC is your rigid vehicles. More often than not, it will be 17 or 18 ton, and then your VOC is basically anything goes. That's the simplest terms. So Steve Norton is one of our compatriots down at YDC, early shift, is asking a question about the meal break issues. Now, I know we haven't got a formal answer on that, but I will just put it on just so people are aware that there's some terms there, and it's not that we fully have an answer on that. It is something we're seeking some clarity on. If there's anything you want to add on top of that, Shell, then by all means.
So, Steve, we didn't realise it would be such a complicated issue, if I'm honest. It's been something that's been conference policy for a while. As you all know, as part of the shorter working week, we make sure that the network drivers get currently a payment, which is us buying back their meal break. So ultimately, after we've done the 4 hours, we should be at a point that the 45 minutes will then become paid. So that's what's been our aim over the time. But Scott rightfully raised with me that this would have quite a substantial impact on a 3-day week. And there have been some mixed messages from the business at the beginning, which I also think's confused it. So I have spoken with Davey, and we are considering if we're going to put something out and what it is we put out, because we also have to be very careful of the message. We don't want it getting complicated. Ultimately, if it's a full-time duty, it's 45 minutes. And then if you require anything on top of that, it's within the legal times. But obviously, I've got some managers out there saying it's 30. Which obviously I expect everyone to challenge. And also, like I said, Scott's raised the issue of what happens to a 3-day week. So again, like I said, I've spoken to Davey. We'll take it back up next week. We've got a meeting with the business on Thursday, online hall. So maybe we'll bottom it off on there for definite and hopefully get something out to everybody.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Shelley. So a bit of appreciation there from Mark. Thank you. There we go. Excellent. Thanks, Mark. So the next section I think we're going to be moving on to, and you kind of touched on it, and maybe it's an area of future work activity that let me banner up future work activity. So you've alluded to there that we maybe the area distribution, mini box, and indeed box in a total might need to work together a bit more closely in terms of having the right work on the right services. But what other future work activity will be about going forward once we've deployed, Shell?
So, goodness, where do I start? I have a list of things I'd like to work on. They just don't want to talk to me about what I want. So we are in discussions over advanced driver codes to review the advanced driver coach agreement, make sure it's robust for the current day, but also to look at, in particular, area distribution. I do think one person looking after 200 to 300 drivers does not really truly give you the value of the role. I know we don't have that in network, but so we're doing some activity with the business on advanced driver coaches. As part of some upgrades to Paragon, the business wanted to change the run times on our network duties. So ultimately with that, we managed to put them off on this occasion due to the length of time it took them to update the RSL. So as a working group on the national network, we will be looking at some run times, including the Paragon updates and making sure we keep you all safe and with the bridges. Oh my goodness, some of the stuff we're going to talk about shortly, recruitment and training and skills and improving our demographics, all of those bits and pieces go on, and just generally the day-to-day stuff, helping people with transfers, etc. I'm sure I've missed something, but I'm trying to not go into the other subjects we said we'd talk about. And obviously, again, another subject later on, we're also looking at our green impact, which is pretty difficult when we're driving our big diesel trucks all over the place, but what we can do about that and how we're trying to work with the business on those activities as well.
Excellent. For you, Dave, does anything there string a chord with you? Is that something you're excited about?
Yeah, I'm always excited about distribution, Scott. No, I think one thing, I mean, we've just got a new area manager in the mid-Yorkshire area for area distribution. And, one thing I've put on sort of we have weekly SIs now, be it via Skype or face-to-face, is 7.5 ton training for 7.5 ton drivers. I know we as a branch, Scott, we had a motion accepted. I can't remember the last conference. It must have been maybe 3 years ago now. Maybe 2 years. 3 years. 2 years. Wait, 2 years. So obviously my concern as our MGV drivers leave the business, the grandfather rights goes with them. And anybody who now wants to drive a 7.5 ton vehicle has to get the license through their own means, really. So, which is fine, and people are doing that, but I'd hope that we can push the business on some sort of driver training program. Equally, I know we're going to touch on recruitment for the LGV ones, and there's an awful lot of people now going out and procuring the license themselves. So, which is again is great, and it gives us the internal applicants before we have to go external. But I think for me, I know the ADCs in area distribution needs looking at, certainly because of the shortfall, as Shelley said there. But equally, I think a 7.5 ton business training program would be good. If we could manage that.
Excellent. So moving on from that brief bit on because you covered off a few topics there, and some of the topics we're actually going to go into a bit more detail, I think. So the first one, as Dave just said, there's a skill shortage, a definite skill shortage, not just because of the grandfather rights aspect within area distribution, but actually when you look at not just within Royal Mail, but across the country, the national shortage of professional drivers is a massive concern. And if you look at the infrastructure within the company, that's only going to get, well, not the company, the country, it's only going to get worse, isn't it? Because the only way you can move things from A to B as a rule is on the road. So the skill shortage and recruitment campaign is quite critical for the future of Royal Mail, really. So Shelley, would you like to come in at this point to I don't know whether there's any announcement or whether you want to just cover off just what's already gone out. I don't know.
I'm not sure I've got an announcement. What I will say is I have a massive passion for training, and especially for internal applicants, because I know this business is going to change over the next few years. So I think anything we can do to make sure we keep people employed by Royal Mail by giving them an opportunity to upskill, I think that we should be leading that. Now, I do know nationally there are discussions on apprenticeships. I'm not close to that, but a conversation with Chris last week, they are looking at how they can expand that to incorporate the driving. So hopefully they'll be able to give me an update on that. But in the meantime, myself and Davey have both pushed the business on driver training. So as you'll know, we've done a driver recruitment campaign for LGV. Oh goodness, it was April, and we have another one planned for June. The hope was to bring in over 470 drivers. We have had to down dial that in a couple of areas, and the likelihood is some of those numbers may change for June once we see the outputs of the network review. But the hope is we still will take on internals. So to assist us as a department, as a working group, the Resourcing Joint Working Group, we carried out a survey back in March. It was a driver licence survey. It wasn't anything more than, do you hold a C1 or a C+E licence, and do you hold a driver CPC? The purpose of that, as I know not everyone's completed it, was to try and get an understanding of how many people we had in the business with the licence, how many people needed driver CPC, and locations, to try and make sure that when we did the recruitment campaign and looked at numbers, we could do our absolute utmost to make sure that those jobs went to internal candidates before we went to external. Now, there were over 720 people completed that survey, and I'd say it was a 50-50 split on the licence, C+E and C1, and I'd say again it's a 50-50 split on who had driver CPC and who didn't. So for the LGV activity, because that's currently where our focus was on recruitment, of the 140 people we identified that required driver CPC, every single one of them was contacted by the business, along with about another 12, I think we added, that had contacted the department directly. And what we did, the business wrote to them, and we had, by the end date, I think it was 76 responses of people saying that they would be willing to do their driver CPC online, which was a one-off offer. It's not our intention at all to stop classroom-based driver CPC. We were just looking at the timescales of getting everyone over the line ready for the June recruitment, and whether they would do that in their own time. So 76 people identified themselves as they would be willing to do it in their own time, and they would be willing to do it online. So we sought volunteers from within the ADC community, and we had 12. And it will be our ADCs that deliver that driver CPC training online to those candidates. So hopefully when phase 2 comes up, that they'll be the first ones that complete an application for any jobs that are available. But understanding our focus at that time was on C+E licence and for LGV and for the VOCs, because we have used an awful lot of agency in this last year, and at peak we absolutely had to go to contractors, which is not a place any of us want to be. And as Scott has identified, I think the last data said that we were 60,000 drivers short. That's not Royal Mail, that's the country. So if anyone's interested in a good job role, go and secure your C+E licence. But internally the focus was on LGV, because we knew that we needed that level of drivers. So now we've got the activity running. Now we've got people that have applied in wave 1, and hopefully we'll get another load of internal candidates apply in wave 2. Our focus on the working group has turned to area distribution. So again, I said there's over 300 people that have said they've got the C1 licence, and of those people still require driver CPC. So part of our discussions is ensuring that we offer the same opportunities to those people that we've offered to LGV. So that's absolutely what our plan is. The conversation, we've had one conversation, and again, we're due to take that up this Thursday on our working group. But it's a little bit more difficult to identify area distribution over LGV, because the LGV one's easy. It was a national recruitment campaign. We looked at every VOC, we looked at what we needed, we checked the numbers against your data outputs, and we went for a national campaign. Because area distribution offices do their recruitment based on their outputs of their revisions, it's individual to that office. So it's making sure that we're going to have a data check back on all of the area distributions, which will flow through to the group, that says, for example, if Leeds has identified 10 vacancies, that we will monitor them through success factors and make sure that the information we've got on that survey, if people still want it, that those people are aware that those jobs are available, what we can do for that. My big thanks go to Di Wyatt in the department, who's Davy's PA. I think we've received in excess of 150 emails on the basis of that first recruitment campaign. Some of it was people thinking it was a training campaign. It wasn't. It was definitely recruitment. But what that has done is identify to us that there's an absolute level of people that would love to drive for the business. And if that helps us, because there was an awful lot of women that have wrote to us, if that helps us improve our demographics and reduces our age profile, then we should really be working together, the union and the business, to do that. And we shouldn't just rely on those apprenticeships. We should look at what we can do now. And I know I'm going on a little bit, but I still think advanced driver coaches can play a key role in that. And it is something that I've floated past the business, is that maybe we could reintroduce driver trainers, something we used to have many years ago. Maybe we could introduce them again, and therefore we could control our training, control the costs of our training, not pay externals to deliver that for us. And I do think there would be sufficient workload for people if we got to that place. But those conversations are very tentative and very early. But I'm hopeful that if we are all committed to making sure that we are the best at what we do, which is absolutely what we are, then it should be something we should hopefully move forward on.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Shell. It's I was sitting back, I was just enjoying watching it for then. I forgot that I'm actually hosting it, but there we go. Oh dear me. Right, so Dave, on that then, so we, as you've already said, as a branch had identified the shortfall. It's quite reassuring really that some of the messages that Shelley just covered off there, particularly in area distribution, and actually this latest revelation really that we're going for driver trainers beyond the ADCs, or perhaps as part of. But can you make some comments on that?
Well, I mean, it's, driver recruitment in Royal Mails is welcomed, for any size vehicle. And just to give people a flavour of the agency levels we've been using in. I mean, it's difficult to gauge against the year we've just had, but obviously with volumes, etc. But for the YDC alone, our agency figures for weeks 1 to 52 of last year came out suggesting that we were 141 full-time drivers short per week. That's per week at 36 hours 15. And there's a similar theme in Leeds distribution. We get the agency figures every week. The agency figures in Leeds will have an element of the mini VOC figures, and they equate to 38 full-time jobs, MGV at 38 hours. So there's a huge requirement. I mean, we've had some issues, we've had some fallouts with business in Leeds about recruitment. They're now recruiting on back of the vacancies. We got to 18 vacancies at one point in Leeds MGV alone, which is a ridiculous amount. We're resourcing meetings on a weekly basis. We can make part-time up to full-time, etc. But you've still got to backfill these roles because, for want of a better phrase, we're driving, you always need a bum on a seat. Whether you take 1 Yorkie or 15 Yorkies, that vehicle's got to go because of compliance, QFS compliance, etc. But there is a need for wholesale recruitment, and long overdue, very welcomed, I've got to say, Shelley.
Just on that, Dave, for information, 1,543 agency drivers are used on a weekly basis prior to the network review. That's what the output figures say to us, just for national network. So across the national network, including the mini VOCs, we are using in excess of 1,500 agency drivers on a regular basis. So we really absolutely need to reduce that down and make sure that we've got people in those roles, members of the CWU, and get that agency use down.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to just make an emphasis there, because if our driver coaches are watching this stream, you are they are worth your weight in gold. So there we go. Thanks for that, Chris. In terms of moving that slide on, because there's some crossovers what we're talking about with short recruitment and the skill shortages, particularly something Chris has touched on to, and wrong one. It's about the CPCs holding people back as well. So what we're going to go and talk on to, which kind of overlaps a little bit, you've obviously covered off why the recruitment phase were in 2, to give those people that opportunity didn't have the CPC to try and access that CPC before the second batch. But equally, the resumption of training has and is an LTB. There's a couple of LTBs about that, and some people may have some concerns about that reintroduction of training. But equally, you know, the state of I think the rollout of the vaccine, for example, the state of the national pandemic is still there, but it seems to be under somewhat of a control. So they're using that guidance to come up with a way of moving that training forward. So, Shell, what sort of comments or discussions do you want to liven up with?
So, firstly, I would agree with Chris. Driver CPC is definitely a barrier. It's not meant to be. Our national agreement says driver CPC shouldn't be a barrier, but it clearly is a barrier, and it's one that we need to find a solution for. And I think some of that may be an education of the business as a whole, rather than it just being about sorry, just Chris Brewer's just popped up on my screen. Forgot how much I missed him. But so yeah, we need to look at how we improve getting driver CPC over, and particularly educating deliveries and processing. That whilst somebody needs to go on a CPC course to maintain their license, actually is not a devaluing of something they can do for the business. And we should try and accommodate that. But I think that's something we really need to work on. So driver CPC at this minute is a barrier, and it shouldn't be. And we're doing everything we can to make sure it's not. But on the resumption of training, look, all of you know it's been an awful year. It's been extremely difficult to do our training, not just on driver CPC, but, you know, our in-house training, our in-house assessments with the driver coaches. So what we've done, he's throwing me a little bit. So what we've done is Dave Joyce has agreed that driver CPC can recommence from tomorrow. It's definitely on COVID safe guidelines, so we need to make sure we keep people safe. Up until now, we've only been doing driver CPC for those whose licenses were due to, well, the driver CPC card was due to run out. So we were maintaining anyone that was due to lose the driver CPC by June had to go on the driver CPC course. So we've managed that. But now by getting it back up and running with our ADCs in a COVID safe environment for the ADCs and for the attendees, hopefully we'll be able to catch up on the driver CPC for our current drivers whilst working on a solution for those that require it. And the in-cab training, I think...
So just on that, Shell, if I can interject, I can put on the main COVID safe guidelines if you'd like, just to refer what they are. So there we go. So
there is only 6 people in a room. You must be socially distanced. You must keep your masks on. We'll make sure the room is cleaned before and after, so that you know that if you're following a class, that at the end of the day that room has been cleaned, ready for you. So all the site rules, the hand sanitizers, everything we can think of. I know Dave Joyce has done a great job to make sure that that's been covered off in that, and that come out in an LTB quite recently. So thanks, Scott, for showing that up.
No problem. So just if people want reference, that's the LTB 177/21. If people want a copy of that, that's what LTB they'll need to see their rep about. But yes, that's the COVID secure. So the business and people involved in that need to follow that closely, and if not, to feedback to the appropriate safety rep, I would imagine.
And then just on the in-cab training, which absolutely has come at the right time for us, for the recruitment activity, which is linked. The in-cab training, I believe we could start again on the 1st of May. Again, there are really strict COVID safe guidelines. These are slightly different. You do have to have a negative COVID test 2 days from a lateral flow 2 days prior to your training, or you will not be able to take part in your training. So you will definitely need to prove that you have a clear COVID test that you've done 2 days prior to your training day. that you will wear your mask for the duration of you being in the vehicle. The windows will remain open in the vehicle, and the touch points will definitely be done before and after the sessions when you go out in the vehicles. But it is important that we get this back up, not just for your day-to-day training that we need, maybe accident support or your 110 training, but more importantly, as part of the activity on driver recruitment, for internal candidates, there is a 20-hour option that people can tap into. So if you've not driven a lorry for a while, but you've got the license and you've been in deliveries or processing, and you get in that vehicle to do your assessment, the likelihood is that something just won't go right on the day. But that's not because you're not a good driver, that's because you've not been in that vehicle for an awfully long time. So the 20 hours was introduced to make sure there was a level of support for internal applicants so that they didn't just get thrown out of the system. So if you're an agency driver and you failed an assessment, you failed an assessment. We didn't want that for internal candidates on the option that they've probably been working elsewhere in the business. So the 20 hours was introduced to make sure that the ADCs could give training after a failed assessment, focusing on whatever it would be, whether it's reversing, which I find is generally the thing that comes up, it's the reversing that we need, and that they get that 20 hours with an advanced driver coach that they're then reassessed. And 100% of that generally means we get our internal candidates across the line because it's given them a level of support that they wouldn't get if they'd come in from external. So it's quite important that we've got that training back up and running.
I mean, Dave, it's quite an interesting development that in recent years, isn't it, the extra training for what Shelley's just described, because certainly when I was, came across onto the driving side, and I'm sure it were a similar, maybe slightly different for you because they didn't want, put my teeth back in. Didn't you pass your test with an internal process anyway, whereas I was external and then moved across to YDC and then basically thrown in the deep end. So it's interesting. I mean, it's positive that, and it's got to be positive that we're offering that extra support. But do you want to sort of talk about how it was back in the day, so to speak?
Back in the day. Well, you're right, Scott. At the time, I think I passed my class 1 in '96, and we had the business, and I just think it were a YDC thing. They developed a driver there for training, took all the courses needed to take, and he was a YDC driver, based at the YDC, obviously, and he became an LGV1 driver trainer. And there were a few past him. I think I was the first one. And then for some reason, there was an argument about how they could pay him. So they used to pay him on overtime. I don't think there was a specific allowance at the time for a class 1 trainer. They used to pay him the old JV5 grade as it was many years ago. And that wasn't enough. And eventually he left the business. And I have to say, knowing him as a driver, as soon as you get in cab, you put at ease with that person. You know him, from in the workplace. And I mean, it's still nerve-wracking, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot easier, I think, than having an external, an external trainer. And being slightly cynical, I think some of these external training companies will see the Royal Mail red vehicle turn up and they'll think, oh, we'll be getting some more money out of these. I think that's happened with a lot of things. And for me, if we can get internal trainers, driver trainers back on side and back in, it'd be fantastic. It'd be a real step forward for us, and it would be cost effective. It'd save the business thousands of £1,000s nationally.
And and it's not necessarily a training thing, Scott, as well, but we also, as the working group, I think I'm trying to think who said it. I'm trying to think it was Steve Sartori, but one of our working groups, he said after the last recruitment campaign back in 2019, we'd had a new driver turn up at the office, and the office just gave him a set of keys to a brand new 110 and went, off you go. Now, this person had come internally from deliveries. That was his first day. I absolutely accept he passed the assessment, but we didn't have a process in place to make sure we do something called onboarding properly. So other offices had a buddy for a week but other offices just gave them the key and off they went. So we've also introduced, because we did a survey of the new drivers at that time, and we've now introduced an onboarding process as well with the business, so that that new driver should get that support, not just through the process, not just for the extra 20 hours, but on that first week, which I understand probably buddying up in a cab is going to be difficult, but to make sure that we don't just give that driver a set of keys and say, off you go. It's about making sure we give that driver a set of keys, talk to them, hopefully support them in cab if we can, but if not, know that they've got someone there they can go to if they're a little nervous or concerned for those first few days.
Excellent. I do seem to recall there was a similar process to how you just described it in the YDC, if I remember rightly, Dave, where the coaches were coaching them, they're giving them the extra coaching if needed, the extra hours, but equally it was that they identified some people that could go with perhaps I suppose without cherry picking, they knew them and they knew they were approachable enough. And I think that helped boost the confidence a little bit. But equally, it's also about identifying some of the runs, because quite frankly, some of the sites that we visit, you don't want to be going to a particular site on your first solo mission. Your large units like your YDC and NDC, Northwest and such, or your distribution centres shouldn't be as daunting, other than maybe PRDC because it's in London. But that's quite positive, I think.
I think the thing to remember, just to come back on that, Scott, is that when a lot of our internals pass the class 1, they don't get behind the wheel again for months and months. Sometimes years before there's another recruitment drive, and from passing your test to getting in with an ADC, and the ADCs, I can only speak for YDC, they're very, very good. Without bullying up too much more, they are very, very good at what they do, and they put you at ease, and they do a great job. And I think the additional training, and I think the business should also recognise that, if they're so close to passing that assessment, it needs the extra little kick. I think they will do that, and the coaches know straight away, in fairness, who'll need more. There are some people, we've got them at the YDC, who've come in, pass the class 1 straight in, and they're as confident that they'll go anywhere and do anything. And others are a bit more, need a bit more additional cajoling, let's say.
Excellent. So I think we've covered masses of information and topics, but we're still not quite finished. But this is an opportunity, though, that we are starting to wind it down. So people, if you are watching, you want to get a question in, then do so quick so they can actually get to it. The next topic is the environmental impacts and, I suppose, the green agenda. So clearly the government has set out its aspiration really to do away with carbon, or to reduce carbon to a certain zero footprint. So Royal is obviously a large company, one of the largest logistical companies, I think, in the country, and therefore you could argue is one of the most pollutants as a consequence of that. But we are dealing with that, aren't we, Shell?
We are, Scott. So you'll know over time we've introduced an awful lot of electric vehicles into the delivery function. I think it was announced this week that Bristol East will become a 100% electric vehicle office, which is positive, and it's going along the right way. But that's far more difficult to achieve for the big truck, because you can't electrify us, not unless you want to fill our trailer with tons of batteries, which sort of defeats the object. So the business have been trialling for a number of years an element of gas-powered trucks. So our first vehicle, and it didn't go overly well, but I think that's because it had been a recommissioned vehicle. So we've been trialling 2 Iveco vehicles at Warrington and Chorley for around about roughly a year, 18 months. Both vehicles have gone well. Both vehicles have specific runs. The drivers, I've had no negative feedback. They don't see them as being slow, which was a big complaint for the previous one. The mileage is pretty good, is what we're getting out of them, considering the one coming back for Chorley's is full of nested Yorks and it's quite a hilly area. So it's slightly down on its miles per gallon, but it's still working extremely well. So the business approached us last year, funny enough, to see if we could increase the gas trucks. and then made a decision financially not to do it and go with the diesel trucks because they could get more diesel trucks for their money, which I think was disappointing. I was disappointed, but there's definitely been a turnaround within the last month. So the business have now secured another 29 gas vehicles that will run from Chorley, Warrington and Preston. There is a reason it's in that area. We have some good filling stations. We have a partnership with CNG Fuels. So they're over there and it works well. Plus we've been trialling them over there, so we know the drivers like them. So it's working through that. We've got another 29 due to join the operation. Well, effectively now they are ready to go. And we cleared the terms of reference for them on Friday. On this occasion, though, we have pushed that it isn't just about the drivers. It's not just about the vehicle. It is also about how we maintain them. So we've put a lot of words in that TOR that ensures that the business scope the ability to bring the maintenance of those vehicles in-house to fleet. So we're also working on that as well to make sure that, again, we're not spending that money externally, but if we are truly keen on introducing gas vehicles, that we look after them ourselves. And I imagine it's not missed by many people that our customers are looking at our green profile. A lot more customers view what their mail provider is doing. Amazon has gone to electric. John Lewis has been gas for an awfully long time. So because there is such a focus of it in the media, all the work that David Attenborough has done, I do think people are more up to date with what the impact is, and that we really should be, as one of the largest fleets in the UK, we should really be doing some of that. Most people would say put it on a train. Let's be fair, that's probably the most carbon neutral you can do, but we don't have that level of access to the lines, and we certainly wouldn't be able to move all of our traffic around that way. So it's trying to find another solution. So we do have the train from PRDC, Warrington and SDC. So it's making sure that on top of that, with these vehicles, trialling these vehicles, making sure they are looking at what the future holds for them, and working together with the business on that process. They are used locally, so they don't go on long runs due to the fact that CNG are still building up their fuel stations. So I think it's 350 miles we get out of the Chorley one. So it's making sure we keep it in that vicinity. It's also affected by weather, whether it be hot or cold, so we have to take that into account. But the hope is that CNG Fuels are starting to build more fuel stations. So really for me, the test for the vehicle is whether we can take it on a long run. So if we do get a fueling station, can we take it from Northwest to SDC? If we have the ability to fuel up and take that time into account. So I think we're in quite a good new place on green, and I do think that it's quite positive. And has great potential to introduce those vehicles into the business.
Excellent. There was, there we go. LTB, I think, released on Friday, and that was some of the offshore. So this is the Chorley fleet, I believe, isn't it, or the Northwest fleet?
Yeah.
And one thing, there was some literature. We are trying to find some literature for tonight's session, actually, and that one came out, so that we're fortunate. But there was some comparison about the different, I suppose, the carbon effect or the carbon footprint on these different types of vehicles. So we've got like the different Euro generations which drive down different types of emissions. The nitrogen dioxides, I think. But the two key ones are CNG, which brings it down massively, and then there is recycled, I suppose, chip fat oil is the best way of doing. And the carbon footprint for those two are very, very similar. So could we just have a massive investment in deep fat fries across raw mail and then use thick fat fries or something? Maybe we should.
Maybe we should reopen all those quadrant restaurants and join it up, shouldn't we? That's what we should do.
Yes. Yeah, we used to enjoy. we used to enjoy. Sorry, Shell, go on.
Go on, love. No, it's fine.
I was just going to say, Dave and I used to enjoy our deep fried salads, didn't we? In the YDC.
As long as it was battered. Yeah. But CNG specifically, I've got their site open. If I'm looking to the side, because I don't want to get it wrong, is they are CNG is different from liquid natural gas, as it is a byproduct of the decomposition of food and animal waste, which is safely collected in what they call is an anaerobic digester and then injected into the national grid. So ultimately, it's 100% is what they're saying, renewable biofuel. So it doesn't have a negative impact in any way part of the process that it goes through. So I do think if we can do something with that's positive. And I do think an awful lot of John Lewis's fleet is already there. So it's not something that's new. We're not trialing something that has just been brought onto the market. We've got people that we've learnt from and we can go to for guidance. So I do think it's quite good.
Yes. So that's perhaps going to be more unique to to network, isn't it? The CNG modelling. So in terms of area distribution, how will that be affected? I did see some battery powered being tested around London, and they're sort of like 7.5 ton equivalents. So is that something that could be
proper ugly vehicles? They weren't pretty vehicles at all. I honestly can't tell you where we are. I don't think we use them anymore, would be my gut feeling. They were extremely quiet. So there was a lot of feedback from members of the public that couldn't hear them, which is why I think we put noise now into the smaller vehicles. But I'll tell you what, I'll go take a look and see where we are with 7.5 ton, because I do think sometimes I think distribution and it's all one-sided. So we do definitely need to take a look, see what we can do for area distribution. So I'll go away and make some inquiries on that for you.
Excellent. So there's a couple of comments that have come in. So if we sort of answer them and then look towards winding down, there's a tag of an LUF C73 MOT, which I presume means matching on together. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, I think this one. I think the first one. Sorry, Scott. How quickly can they work between area distribution and mini-vox movers BAU so that the right volumes of Yorks are set on the correct size vehicle, and how does the movement between functions happen? And I think this is born out of the conversation we've had in Leeds last week relating to larger vehicles with small volumes that probably sit on a different vehicle. So I mean, just my understanding of, after seeking advice from Shelley and spoke to yourself, Scott, in fact, I mean, we've now got a planner, as I understand, who's looking after the YDC VOC and also now looks after the Leeds Mini VOC. So we've got a planner who's looking after both sites. So my understanding, I have spoke to this planner on Friday about my concerns about vehicles not being aligned right to volume. But I'll take it from you, Shelley, where you think it should go.
So, Dave, it's not an easy answer, is it? Okay, I haven't got a solution. I haven't got a magic wand I can wave. All I can say is, for the purpose of you doing a pad revision or doing a network revision, you can only look at the work you're doing at this time that's in your RSL. So the area distribution RSL and the network RSL, because that's your data gathering process. If, however, as part of that process, because you do work closely together, I do know that your mini VOC rep was in the office with Scott the other day when I spoke to him, and I do know that Leeds distribution work closely as well. If, as part of those discussions, there is an identified vehicle utilisation, which everyone's looking at constantly, we don't utilise our vehicles enough. Nick Dunn's just bought another 200 trailers, I think it is, for National Network, but he's avoided the 110s because we just don't utilise them to the pleases everyone, but we don't utilise the space or the capacity in the best way we can. So what you can't do, you can't resolve the issue of vehicle utilisation by incorporating work into your RSL that isn't in your RSL as it stands. But we can look at afterwards if there is some synergies we can work together to make sure that we get that right. Because the last thing we want is a 17-ton running around with 2 Yorks in it and us having to send 2 7.5 tons when we could put it on a 17. So it's about us working together. But to get there, we need to focus on the RSL we're responsible for at this time, which in this case is the area distribution. The mini VOC sits under the network RSL, and that's where we need to start and work through from that.
Excellent. So there's just a couple of other comments, which I think if we can just wind them off, that would be fantastic. First one with Callum, said he's interested in likes of the advanced driver coaching, but he feels that maybe the time in the company may hold him back. I think we can tie that in nicely with the other one from LUFC 73. And it's about the ratio of ADCs to drivers in a said office. Now, particularly, I think answering Callum, I think it's quite evident that it's not a straight seniority aspect, it's a specialist role, and therefore that's the process there, and interviews one thing another. But there is an agreement on that, isn't there? So end of the day, if he's interested, just to get in touch with one of the local reps, and I'm sure about to get a copy of that for him to peruse. Would you like to add anything else onto that, Shelley, and perhaps answer about the ratios?
Right, so the ratio, without having the agreement in front of me, I couldn't tell you, but most most network offices would have in the larger ones in the ratio of 4 advanced driver coaches, between 2 and 4, depending on the size of the office. Unfortunately, when the deal was done on national network, the area distribution one fell behind. It wasn't secured at the same time. I think we secured that in 2016. But at that time, it was 1 per mail centre catchment area, really to get them into place so we had them. But since then, I think you'd all expect we've had a few issues of disputes, etc. So we've not been able to get that number up. But I have got an ADC working group, a gentleman from Mount Pleasant, John Eden, sits on it for me, who's predominantly looks after area distribution. Liam Kavanagh for the network, and John looks after 3 offices, I think. And he said himself he can't physically do the yearly checks, as well as all the safety support we give, and all of the driver CPC. So clearly, what we're doing as a working group is we're looking at red lines, things that have to be done no matter what. So we can't intervene in them in any way at all. And then we're going to build up from that. So I don't think necessarily I've got a ratio, but it's definitely about increasing the advanced driver coaches and area distribution. And in relation to Callum, you're absolutely right. It's a specialist role. You have to apply for that role and follow that process. It's very similar. If someone decides to give it up, you can't just walk away from that role. You have to give your notice, and then you can be asked to cover that role until we found a replacement. So it's not a case of you popping your notice in on a Monday and you're back as a driver on the Tuesday. The business can absolutely keep you in that role till they found a replacement. So it's quite robust. We don't want to lose them. There is one office in the country that doesn't have one at the minute, which we're working through. But I do think every candidate that comes up, the manager doesn't like, so we don't seem to bring anyone through. But we're having to then rely on an advanced driver coach from another office that's struggling looking after the people he's or her have got in relation to the numbers anyway. So absolutely, Callum, take a look at the agreement, and we'll make sure we'll do what we can to move that situation forward.
Excellent. I think I got mixed up actually with a couple of comments, to be fair, because I think I banded one comment to do with an RSL with the movement of work. So that's a movement of work between the functions, and it's something we have sort of briefly covered off, I think, beginning of the session, as well as periodically.
I'm not sure, Scott, if LUFC somebody's asking about the ratio for the YDC. If he is, the ADC ratio drivers to coach at the YDC is about 1 per 60, I think, or just over 1 per 60. I think we've got about 183 drivers and 3 full-time coaches, I think. I don't know if that's what he's asking or she's asking for.
It's possible. It's possible.
And on the movement of work, Scott, I don't think we can cover that much more than what we have. We understand there's a problem, particularly with Leeds and Leeds Minivoc, and we need to do some work to look at that, which I've committed to both of you. I'll absolutely support you through that.
Excellent. So I think a final question from someone I know in Beverley, no less. And well, he asks, and this may be a question more for David to answer, but what sort of timescale, Dave, from someone with zero experience driving to get to a professional driver? I mean, arguably, once you've got your license, you still don't become very professional at it. So, we'll take it from there. What sort of timescale? What would you expect the best case, and what might be a typical case scenario?
Well, at the moment, as you know, our LGV, I presume is referring to LGV one driving. Our LGV recruitment is looking at internal candidates with the correct license. So a number of people who are on that, who are applying for these jobs, have already got the skills. So, right or wrong, they're going out and they're getting their own license through their own financial means. And I think, Shelley's sort of intimated that we might be looking at driver training. We've also got the career path, which, in my opinion, it's great for bringing people through. But even that career path looks at people who are halfway there, maybe with a 17-ton, so just got one hurdle to go to the class one. So we've had a couple of YDC who's come through career path, but I've got to be, if it's Peter Britt, the guy who you're referring to there, I think, Peter, you probably, to speed up the process, if that's your ambition to be a class one driver at your nearest VOC, then, until there's a guaranteed driver training program from the business, I think you'd probably be an idea to go and get the license yourself if you can. And I'm conscious that it's an expensive thing to do, but until the career path widens and gets further sort of interest from the business, I think that's probably the best way to go, unfortunately, for you. If you want to speed yourself up, that'll be my advice. And I've advised that to other people who's asked a similar question.
Yeah, it's typically around £1,000 per license upgrade, isn't it? And you're looking at least a week per. That's if it's a crash course and you don't crash it, to be fair. So,
but it also depends where you're starting from, Scott, doesn't it? So if you're starting from your car license up and you're after 1997, because that's when the grandfather right stops. So if you're prior 97, you'll have the 7.5 ton on your license. If you're after 97, you won't have the 7.5 ton on your license. So you'll have to work your way through that process. And Dave's absolutely right. Driver career path went with closest license first. That's what it was. It was about keeping that cost down. I think it was about £1,500 roughly from that point. But I think taking it up, it's about £2,500 to £3,000 if you want to go up. I think it's an investment, not just for raw mail. As you said, there's a shortage of drivers in the country in the long run. Driver CPC is cheaper at the minute. I think online, you can do an online course for $225. I'm sure as we start opening up from lockdown, that price will go back up. But I also think if that's what you're short of, and you didn't complete the survey or you didn't respond to the email from the business, it might be worth your while going and securing that so you can apply in wave 2 as well. But I know absolutely accept it's a lot of money. The young workers spoke to myself and Davey the other week about that. How can we look to change our demographics? Because we are an absolute ageing workforce in the driving community. I think our average age is 55. So don't all of you be leaving me at once, because you'll be leaving me in an awful lot of trouble with no one to backfill. But how can we bring more younger people through? So just to give you an idea of the 249 internal applicants that have applied for wave 1, only 10 of them were women. So we definitely need to do something about that. Internally, there were 67 BAME members, which I think is brilliant. But again, we can still do more to improve that. But under 30s was 9. But over 50s was 80. So, I'm just exasperating the problem a little bit at the minute. Not that I have a problem with anyone's age. Genuinely, I don't. I welcome you all. But for us to do something to make sure we're robust and strong for the future, we absolutely have to do some work for bringing younger drivers through without finding ourselves in a legal position that we've caused age discrimination. So we need to absolutely look at that too. But it is activity we're doing at this time.
That's excellent. I mean, personally, I when I started at YDC, I was the youngest driver there. This was in 2004. and I was 23. And then I remained the youngest driver, I think, for about 10 years. Yeah.
It's because
and to be fair, well, it's not just the case no one leaves. People were coming in. It's just they were all older than me. Do you know what I mean? So, that's just how it happens. And even now, I think I'm still in the bottom 10 in terms of age, and I'm 40. So there you go. It does sort of put it in perspective, doesn't it? But for those that are actually thinking about putting their hand in the pocket, for the sake of a couple of £1,000 on the basis that you pass first time, then you could get that back fivefold as and when you do become a professional driver very, very easily. But obviously the PDA, what we're governed by, does mean that we'll be working weekend, bank holidays, monthly salary, and it's not all smooth sailing, shall we say. But it is something to be looked at. So with that, I think we've been on an hour and 15 minutes. That's a pretty good session. So thank you both for joining me. It's been a worthwhile session. So without further ado, I think we'll wrap that up. Would you like to say anything in finishing, Shell?
Scott, thank you for the opportunity. I absolutely welcome talking to anyone, and if I'm not the font of all knowledge, so if people have ideas, options, things like that, absolutely please share them through the branches, share them through the department, because sometimes we do the job and we get little blinkers because we focus on those issues, and actually an idea can come from left field that might speed something up. So absolutely, people, please don't hold back. If you've got an idea that could improve recruitment or demographics, I'm definitely open to hearing that. I'd like to say thank you to our members. I think they've done a fantastic job over this last year through difficult times. And they've still come to work and they've still delivered. So for me, absolutely, there has to be a big thank you to the members. But sometimes I think our reps get missed, and I think our reps do an extraordinary job in difficult times. And all of those reps out in the country at the minute, whether they're deliveries or processing or driving reps, we are under an immense level of pressure at the minute to deliver on all of our revision activity, whilst also trying to do the day job of representing our members and making sure that we make that place where they work an absolutely brilliant place to be. So for me, there's a massive big thank you to all of the reps of the CW that do a fantastic job daily, and that absolutely make our life a little bit easier, because I can then tap into them for their ideas and their support for our various working groups, of which there are many in the department, and we would be absolutely lost without all of them. So it's just a big thank you to everybody. And hopefully now the restrictions are reducing, we can go and start visiting our offices again and start seeing people and having some one-to-ones.
Excellent. Dave, have you got any final comments before we
well, no, it's been a good session as always, Scott. Thanks to you for putting it together, and thanks for Shelley for giving up part of a Sunday afternoon to take part. Well done, everyone.
Excellent. So remember, unity is strength. Thanks for watching.